So as I said, and to my mind, the statement that notions of normality are not universal, but are culturally defined, does not seem incredibly controversial or disturbing at this point in history, I guess, from this vantage point. But, and if Benedict stuck to talking about customs and behaviors in terms of normality, I don't think there'd be anything very controversial or even very interesting about this. Probably wouldn't read it, but she goes further. And how does she go further? Well, she goes into morality, which is what we'll be talking about. She says, for instance, on page 3, we do not any longer make the mistake of deriving the morality of our own locality and decade directly from the inevitable constitution of human nature. We do not elevate it to the dignity of a first principle. We recognize that morality differs in every society and is a convenient term for socially approved habits. Mankind has always preferred to say it is morally good rather than it is habitual. That's what makes this essay not simply an essay in social anthropology, but an essay in moral philosophy right there. Of course, if we say that normality is culturally defined, she says again on page 3, normality, in short, within a very wide range, is culturally defined. But then if we say, as she does there, that morality is merely a convenient term for socially approved habits, habits that happen to be socially approved, she's basically equated what is normal with what is moral. She's equated those, having said that what is normal is culturally defined. She's definitely saying that what is moral, what is considered right or good or just or ethical, is also variable, is also culturally defined, and that we should regard the morality of our own culture, as she would say, as simply one possible variation amongst the almost infinite number of possible variations that human nature will allow in terms of moral custom, moral belief, and moral behavior. That way of viewing morality, which is really the first part of this course, is thinking about that way of viewing morality, is called moral relativism. That is, what we consider, or what is moral, can only be understood relative to the standards of a certain culture. The idea being that nothing, no behavior, nothing in the world could be said to be moral in itself, but only in relation to, where the relativism comes in, a certain standard, whether that standard be absolutely arbitrary or whether it be some standard amongst a limited number of possible standards that human beings could create. Questions we'll be looking into. And that's really what I want our first discussion to be about, is about her ideas of moral relativism. But before I close, and this is, the first week is pretty easy. Later on, the essay, the videos, unfortunately, is getting a little more complicated and lengthy as our readings get more complicated and lengthy. What I'd like you to think about before class is a story that she tells, supposedly a true story about people. I think the word is pronounced Kwakiutl. And this is on page 3. And I think this is a Northwestern American people, hunter-gatherer people. She says, among the Kwakiutl, it did not matter whether a relative had died in bed of disease or by the hand of an enemy. In either case, death was an affront to be wiped out by the death of another person. The fact that one had been caused to mourn was proof that one had been put upon. So, trying to describe a different way of seeing things. If somebody close to you dies, that was an affront that needed to be wiped out. They needed to be put back in balance. Things by the death of the loved one put out of balance. A chief's sister and her daughter had gone up to Victoria, and because they drank bad whiskey or because their boat capsized, they never came back. The chief called together his warriors. Now I ask you, tribes, who shall wail? Shall I do it, or shall another? The spokesman answered, of course, not you, chief. Let some other of the tribes. Immediately they set up the war pole to announce their intention of wiping out the injury and gathering a war party. They set out and found 7 men and 2 children asleep and killed them. Then they felt good when they arrived at Sabah in the evening. And she says, the point which is of interest to us is that in our society, those who on that occasion would feel good when they arrived at Sabah that evening would be the definitely abnormal. There would be some even in our society, but it is not a recognized and approved mood under the circumstances. Well, that may be true, but she seems, maybe, sure, a reader may say that she's missed the point, that it doesn't matter if what the people did, the Kwakiutl people did, was considered normal. It may be considered normal in a culture, but isn't what they did immoral? That is, in response to a loss, deaths of members of a group, to go out and randomly, seemingly randomly, kill some other people, doesn't just seem irrational and abnormal to us, it seems morally wrong. Now, this is where the challenge of the essay comes in. If we follow Benedict as far as to agree that the notion of normality is hopelessly relative to culture, there's no one notion of morality, of normality, and if we also accept that ethics or morality, what's right and wrong, is simply a word for socially approved habits, then haven't we gone as far as also to say that morality, what's right and wrong, is culturally determined or culturally defined or relative to culture? If we do that, then we have to ask ourselves on what basis, except our own relative standard, which no one from a different culture could be expected to abide by, on what basis to condemn killing a bunch of people at random in response to the loss of some members of the group. And I guess the first questions I want to get into in this course is how we feel about that. And if we still feel that we have a basis beyond our own limited cultural standards for condemning the behavior of the Kwakiutl in that anecdote, then on what basis is it? That is, do we really believe that our moral beliefs are entirely cultural and relative in nature, or do we really believe that there is a more universal basis for our judgments about right and wrong? You could say that that's the question that we start with in looking at some of the issues involved in moral relativism, but that is the question, the kind of question that we'll be pursuing throughout the course. What does it mean to make moral judgments? And when we make moral judgments, upon what basis do we make them? So we'll have lots more to discuss.